welcome all to this episode of Freedom Hub's Working Group. I am your host, Jeff Cantor, along with my co-host, Charles Froman. We are sponsored by the Freedom Hub, and we are the Disruptors Intersection for sure, and today's going to be no exception to that rule. We are recording all of these, but be aware that we're going to show you where the better place to find them. More importantly, those focus on the fact that we do run some other shows, and so these are the links for them, and there's equally exciting topics there, so I would encourage you to look at all the ones we're on right now with this episode, all the ones that we have in these future shows, and there's a great idea. Join every single one and become a subscriber, because the more subscribers, the more we trend on their hotline. Also, we have two addresses to the exact same website for the marketplace for health, wealth, freedom.com. Let's zip over there for a quick second and take a look. As you see, there's an awful lot here to take a look at and a lot of exciting drop downs, but let's just focus in on a couple things. We do have under the home tab the list of the webinars, which is what we're doing right now. When the webinar's over, we have continuing the conversation. So for anybody that spoke on one of these episodes and you want to get involved with that person, you're going to want to click on that, which takes you over to this tab. And here it's got a chance for you to see all the guests, connect with them, tie into their blog, become a participant in their actions, and so on. It's all very important. Now, also in that same vein, we've got people that are actually helping try to keep things together and make things better. So under the Freedom tab, Fighting for Freedom, we first off start out with a variety of issues and action items. Sadly, these are all current, and you need to actually take advantage of all of them. We try to rotate them out of there as they become defunct. We do show all of the different, and this is ever growing, lists of freedom organizations, so we encourage others to become participants. And then also we do have our marketplace, where we're kind of timely for today because we actually have some medical directive cards about vaccines and masks and the like. So you'll certainly want to come back in here and take a look. But let's take a peek at today. So if we come on that webinar tab, and there's going to be a little breakdown about it, and then there's a listing of the two different webinars that take place. We'll come back up here a moment. We do also feature the ones that are coming up, so you can kind of plan your calendar, and then also a chance for you to find all those past videos. So that's why I said you didn't have to write those down. They're all located in here. We're on BitChute, Brighteon, YouTube, and Rumble. If we take a look at Brighteon as an example, you'll see there's an awful lot of videos. They go back a long, long time, and there's a lot of really great ones. Sadly, these topics are so, important that they never seemingly become old. Some of these issues persist. Some of these have been around for years, these issues, and somebody's just now talking about it again, and that's why we want you to continue the conversation. So on that note, let's find out what we're going to be doing today. So let me zoom back up here to the little listing. And I'm going to have Charles kick in here and explain a little bit about what Bonnie McLean is all about.
Gladly, Jeff, and welcome, Bonnie. We've done a few vaccine-specific webinars over the past couple of years, and it's getting a bit more scary for a number of reasons, and we've done kind of two in a row. Last week we had Dr. Lee Merritt talk about the larger COVID picture, and of course the danger of second-class citizenship for refusers who still want to work or travel. And this is getting scarier because of a few facts, including our old buddy Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum, who does want universal vaccination so we can all get our lives going back together normally again. And his group is funded, mostly by Bill Gates and his various octopus organizations. As far as losing your ability to work or travel, hospitals have long mandated vaccines for doctors and nurses, and that's getting more and more controversial, especially now as reports exist where over half of the nurses in many institutions don't want the experimental liability-free shot. And now airlines are getting into the act, forbidding or threatening to forbid flying if you don't vaccinate. And of course, there's pressure for school teachers and even kids to vaccinate to get the kids back into the classroom. It's notwithstanding that this COVID disease doesn't really affect kids, but who cares about that, right? We're talking about a $500 billion profit opportunity from a universal vaccine mandate for big pharma. And a Yale survey showed that a majority of employers do want to mandate vaccines for whatever reason, if they're concerned about liability, more so than just being real pro-vaccine, who knows. And there are proposals by companies out there, and like the Commons Project, which has the Common Pass idea, a health passport to facilitate travel and work, to show everyone that you've been properly shot up. But, this is not a vaccine that every expert in the world wants, including a former vice president of Pfizer, Michael Yeadon. He has long rejected the idea of a vaccine for a healthy population that's not at risk of the disease. And people are looking at the adverse event data at the government with over 200 deaths from these 2 or 3 now emergency approved shots and over 9,000 harms reported. And we know that adverse events data system only reports 1% of the adverse events in the first place. And those of us paying attention, especially we had Dr. Singleton in the audience here with the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons. Well, the frontline doctors have said for about a year now that they have effective treatments, which renders the idea of a vaccine moot, duplicative, inferior. And now we have the rubber meeting the road with bills in the states mandating or preventing mandates. And here in Virginia, this is a good state to examine because what happens in one state usually happens in others eventually. And Virginia is a good test case because we're a formerly Republican state that, because of the bureaucratic monstrosity growth around DC, has become Democrat. And we've lost our vaccine rights in many cases. Last year, we suffered a terrible defeat where the legislature removed itself from discretion on which shots kids would have to get to attend school. Well, just last week, we finished the loss of 9 bills introduced by a lot of Republicans. But a big point about today is that it wasn't just Democrats that opposed health freedom. There were a lot of Republicans. And what we'll learn is that in some states, Mississippi, for example, a Republican state, they've long forbade a religious exemption. So it's not really just a partisan issue. I mean, this is a situation where we may not have friends anywhere if you're into health freedom or health acts that don't involve pharma for every problem you have. So with that, Bonnie McLean is an activist. She really has hustled the last month efforts in Richmond to get witnesses to testify at the hearings, to really educate the activists on the details of these bills. There are a lot of bills, a lot of members, a lot of complexity. So a lot of folks are happy with Bonnie for kind of filling a gap of leadership to get the grassroots going to help these politicians. And we may even get a call in today from Delegate LaRock on one of his bills. But with that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to Bonnie.
Okay. Well, my name is Bonnie McLean. Thank you, Charles and Jeff, for the introduction. Yes, I think Charles was very accurate. We are facing some pretty critical battles in Virginia. We've lost some, but the fight isn't over. And so basically, we'll discuss some of the legislative battles and hopefully the path forward. One thing I would like to point out is that, yes, Charles is right. We did not have all of our medical freedom bills voted against along party lines. There might be various reasons for that, but the fact remains that we do have some challenges coming from every direction. So if you want to just keep changing slides, one of the key issues that we tried to remedy is that Virginia has had for many decades now religious exemption from childhood vaccines. Various parents, for various reasons, have religious beliefs that make certain vaccines objectionable to them. So, for example, there are vaccines that contain aborted fetal cell lines, and certain pro-life people have an objection to that. For example, there are many, many, many other reasons beyond just that, but that is one of the main ones. And our religious exemption, similar to the state of Tennessee, was written where we had religious exemption unless there would be a state of emergency or an epidemic or a public outbreak. So the moment that the declaration of the public health emergency happened, our rights for religious exemption were suspended. And some people thought that wasn't as big of a deal because, how long is a public health emergency going to last? Most things that are contagious aren't contagious for too long, historically. So, unfortunately, as everyone has seen, the public health emergency has not ended, and therefore this is becoming a long-term problem. So we had various bills introduced to restore the childhood schedule exemption, and you're welcome to keep changing slides. I'll tell you when to stop, but right here is good. One of the big key issues that most people have turned their attention to is the upcoming vaccines. So we'll get back to the childhood ones afterwards. In Virginia, the state health commissioner was granted legal authority to mandate epidemic-related vaccines during an epidemic many, many years ago. So this is not like new legislation. So a lot of people thought we were fine because it hasn't been on the radar, hasn't been in the news, but in actuality, Section 32.1-43 and Section 32.1-48 powers of the commissioner. He was granted that power a long time ago. The interesting thing about it is that there's no restrictions, there's no criteria. He can literally order every man, woman, and child in the state to be vaccinated. And if you want to go to the next slide real quick, the problem with that is it's totally enforceable. So it's actually a crime to not comply, whether it's through negligence or willfully defying it, regardless of the reason. If you're not in compliance, it's a crime. So as everyone probably remembers, our state health commissioner, Dr. Norman Oliver, had stated back in August, I believe it was, and again just recently last month, he seems to be indicating that he does want to mandate it. There's no age restriction. He could mandate it for a child. Would that override the, formerly existing religious exemption for children? Likely. So, this is a problem for parents, this is a problem for adults, and this is a problem for anyone who, for any reason, does not want to participate in these new so-called vaccine experiments. If you want to go to the next slide real quick, another issue with this is the fact that there is a medical exemption. And the medical exemption is not like people think it is. So we'll get back to that again later. But if you want to continue the next slide, yeah, there's civil penalties up to $25,000. I mean, they give the Board of Health and the Commissioner of Health a very, very broad set of powers. Some people keep asking, don't they have to have proof of this or that? It's just all they have to do is declare it. So between the fact that we have no opt-out, no religious exemption, nothing but a medical exemption that doesn't do as much good from the state health commissioner's potential upcoming mandate for the new COVID-19 so-called vaccines, we also have the problem that I mentioned earlier. And getting back to that, the same law that says that it's a Class 1 misdemeanor to disobey, the commissioner also says that it's a Class 1 misdemeanor to go against anything the Board of Health requires. So the childhood vaccination schedule is on, part of the Board of Health's orders. So we do have a strange situation in Virginia where parents are currently subject to criminal prosecution. And the irony in all this is that is a form of religious persecution. people are practicing their religion, following their religious beliefs, and suddenly, one day an emergency is declared, and that emergency has nothing to do with rubella, nothing to do with chickenpox, nothing to do with anything on the list of childhood vaccinations, and yet those very parents are, left vulnerable and subject to criminal prosecution. And the implications of that, families broken up and what have you. I mean, there's far more than just a crime. So we had 3 bills introduced. If you want to go to the next slide. 3 bills were introduced, 1 exclusively just to restore the childhood schedule, and 2 that would have created a religious exemption from the powers of the state health commissioner. And so if you want to click the next slide. In total, we also had some bills that would have been excellent bills to prevent coercion. One of them was introduced by Delegate Dave LaRock that Charles mentioned might be able to join the call later, depending on how the House session goes. But if you want to click the next slide, we have, there were bills that would have protected employees. It would have prevented employers from setting, conditional employment based upon their vaccination status. Some of it was geared towards proof of vaccination. Some of it was actually, more than just proof. There was one bill that would have prevented compulsory testing so that you don't have to go to a grocery store and potentially one day, have to prove that, you've been tested. There's also the situation with the apps. I'm not sure how many have heard of this, but VCU started on January 25th with apps where the students have to show their app as to whether they've been tested and whether they're able to enter 4 different buildings. And if you want to click the next slide. So yeah, workplace discrimination prevention, preserving religious freedom, establishing a way to prevent religious persecution, preventing coercion, because widespread coercion, maybe a year ago people wouldn't have thought that would be possible, but we've seen that with the face covering mandates, mask mandates throughout the country, throughout the world. Things can have the effect of a mandate without being mandated directly by the government, and the government seems fond of using private enterprises to enforce their whims. So with no scientific data, with no proof whatsoever. So preventing coercion, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others who worked on these bills, is really critical, because you're preventing a mandate in practice. And then conditional access is, of course, like not being able to enter a grocery store, not being able to go to a library, not being able to go to a park, a museum, etc. So if you want to click the next slide. And just to finish up the medical exemptions, one thing that Senator Donovan mentioned in the General Laws and Technology Committee that is not accurate, and I understand not everyone understands how these laws work or how things work actually in real life and in practice. People have heard reports of, California, or certain people like, maybe I'll just pay a doctor, or maybe, in their mind, people are looking for a way out, and they see that in the law that there's something there regarding, a physician being able to sign something. Well, I have spoken to many, many different physicians and many, many different people throughout the state. And first of all, because traditionally we've only had vaccine mandates for children, this has been an issue surrounding parents and pediatricians and children. Now this is expanding to the general population and people of all ages. But medical exemptions in Virginia are extremely rare. They're difficult to obtain. You literally, the child has to be in such poor health that you wouldn't want your child in that kind of health to even potentially be considered. And that doesn't mean that they would be guaranteed a religious exemption. There are children who are in very poor health who do not receive medical exemptions. And then there's a lot of issue now in the news where you have certain entities recommending that people with life-threatening allergies avoid vaccines or products containing polyethylene glycol, for example, anaphylaxis is a concern. Well, allergies do not qualify for a medical exemption. So I think that's key to point out to people that that is not our way out. That is not an option. That is not like something that's going to save us. So if you wanted to click the next slide, that was one thing that Senator Donovan said that was very inaccurate. And I think our legislators really, really need some education in certain matters. Again, this is not a popular subject, so I don't think they've heard anything except for perhaps what's on the news or what they're told from the Virginia Department of Health. I don't know how much detail anyone is interested in the bills. I'm welcome to, you know, scroll through the bill patrons real quick. I'll just say Senator Mark Peake has been incredible. He introduced Senate Bills 1116 and 1117. 1117 would have restored the religious exemption for children. 1116 would have done the same, but also it also was going to create a religious exemption from the state health commissioner. So if you want to just keep scrolling, we'll just really briefly go through that, and then if anybody has any questions, I'd be delighted to go through any further detail. Senator Amanda Chase, all three of her bills were coercion preventing bills. 1451 in particular would have ensured that state and local public property, which is, you know, government funded, government run, would not prevent people from accessing that property on the basis of their discrimination, or, you know, discriminating on the basis of their vaccination status. Delegate Dave LaRock introduced an incredible House bill. It would have made sure that the DMV couldn't stop anybody from getting, you know, providing driver's licenses, etc. And there's a whole ton of stuff in there, even insurance. It was a really, really good bill with a list of things that would have prevented coercion. There's also the House Resolution 573 is still alive, last I checked, but that doesn't seem to have come before the Rules Committee yet. If you want to just keep scrolling.
Can you hear me there, Bonnie?
Yes.
I'm just interrupting for a moment because this is, David just jumped on here, so maybe he wants to.
Wonderful.
And Jeff, we're not hearing you.
You're not hearing me?
No. Barely.
Oh, wow. I don't know why that is.
So you want to unmute Delegate LaRock, you want to unmute yourself and say a few words about your bill and where we go from here?
Okay, there he is. David, are you there? You have to unmute yourself there.
Yeah, Delegate LaRock, you have to unmute yourself. And Jeff, you still are not audible. Well, while Delegate LaRock unmutes himself, Bonnie, you want to kind of finish up there with the bill patrons?
Sure. Delegate Mark Cole, he introduced a bill last year in special session, House Bill 5016, that would have created religious exemptions. He introduced that, you know, practically that bill was incorporated into 2268 that would also have restored the childhood religious exemptions. So if you want to keep scrolling. And Delegate Wendell Walker introduced House Bill 2335. That was basically a declaration of the fundamental rights, things that are basically in the Constitution but aren't really clarified. So, you know, a person's right to bodily integrity, you know, preventing testing, preventing, you know, being forced to be injected. And Delegate Bill Wiley was incredible. He really fought really hard for House Bill 2336. That bill would have also helped by adding a condition of FDA approval to the Code of Virginia. What that would have done would have been prevent, you know, the potential for criminal prosecution and enforcement of the state health commissioner's mandate. Far more important bill than most people realize. But is Delegate LaRock here yet?
It doesn't seem to be functioning still. I just
okay.
Googled him again.
Well, hopefully we'll get that straightened out. Oh, yeah, in the meantime, yeah, this was a quote from the House Committee, Health, Welfare, and Institutions Committee, but from Delegate Mark Levine, who's definitely not a friend of health freedom. But basically, he said that unless folks are going to stay home and never leave their home sometimes in rare circumstances, but in cases of pandemic, it may be required to have medical mandates. So he has stated that quite clearly more than once, but I think this last time in particular, he made that perfectly clear. The irony of that is no government agency, no department, no entity of any kind that I'm aware of, no medical professional has even suggested that COVID-19 is contagious for longer than a matter of few weeks. So having to stay home for the rest of your life or being forced to never leave your home, as he put it, just makes no sense from a contagion standpoint. I sincerely doubt that he was vaccinated for chickenpox, and yet he goes around through life, without worrying that he's spreading it around, because like chickenpox, I mean, not to say that the two are the same severity, but to say that the principle is that most infections are not contagious for a long period of time, thankfully. But yeah, another thing is that the CDC, I'm sure everybody has seen, and Dr. Fauci and others, that we still have to continue to wear masks and social distance and all the other restrictions. So is Delegate LaRock available yet?
I can't seem to get him to unmute somehow.
Yeah, Jeff, we're not hearing you still, but if you want to wrap it up, we can go to Q&A if you like, Bonnie.
Sure, I'm pretty much done.
Okay. Jeff, I'd invite Dr. Singleton, our resident doctor and lawyer, who's been active at APS, to kind of comment on the situation that not just Virginia, but all 50 states are facing, even nationally. Dr. Singleton, do you want to say a few words?
Can you hear me? I'm off mute. Okay, hi. Thank you for that presentation. Virginia seems like California light. Another fellow and I just finished writing something in anticipation of mandatory COVID vaccines in order to go into businesses. And we framed it as an anti-discrimination section we have a UNRRA civil rights law that says you can't discriminate against people for housing and rentals and whatnot. And it's very broad. It's broader than the federal civil rights law. And so we've added this as another civil right. Oh, I love that. And trying to beat some of these legislators to the punch, because I feel you're right. Mandatory everything is coming. And even though it's not from the government, once businesses decide to make things mandatory, then you'll be stuck in your house and you won't be able to go anyplace. And that's when it is up to us to just say no. And perhaps enough people will not go to the business if they just keep this up. If you look at something called the FARR, F-A-R-R, named after Dr. Farr, back in the smallpox days in the 1800s, he developed a curve for pandemics and epidemics. And it's basically a what goes up must come down bell-shaped curve. And looking at that curve, this will go away, even with these variants or mutations, however you want to characterize them. So unfortunately, the people who want to maintain power want us to think that this will be around forever. And that's where you're so right, Bonnie. We have to stick together and we have to all just say no together. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Singleton. I would like to add to that, now that you mentioned California Light, when I was speaking to health freedom activists in California, actually, in a certain way, Virginia is worse than California in the sense that our laws are written in such a way that all children are required to abide by the same vaccination schedule. So even if you pull your child from school, even if you homeschool, homeschoolers are under the same exact laws. So in certain states, they pull their child from school or they homeschool, and the parents are no longer subject to criminal prosecution or harassment or what have you. In in Virginia, criminal prosecution the parents are still vulnerable and subject to that regardless. So the fact that we don't have, you know, any homeschool protection, or in the fact that homeschoolers are not exempt from anything is a concern to many people. So California is actually Virginia light when it comes to the children's side of things. I think Delegate Dave LaRock is on now, so we've been eagerly awaiting to hear from you. Are you able to speak now?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for attending.
So, Delegate LaRock, I'm sure you have some things to say about your bill, about the process, about the tenuous situation we find ourselves, not just with potential employer vaccine mandates and leaked registry information, et cetera, but feel free that you have the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm jumping in the middle of your meeting. Sorry, I'm just kind of getting situated here. I moved out of my office, get a little fresh air. So sorry if it's looked like I was taking you on a tour of my house. Yeah, hard to know where to begin. A lot of good bills in this year, a lot of reasonable proposals to provide the kind of exemptions or respect medical freedom, respect the need for informed consent. And I don't know, sometimes I think I'm a little naive expecting there to be some degree of participation, cooperation by Democrats, but they pretty much march in lockstep. And while very often they are advocates for non-discrimination, I had a bill that would propose not discriminating against people on the basis of their vaccine status. Seems like a very reasonable proposition. And that got me, they raked me over the coals for that pretty good. Somehow or another, they got the Richmond Times-Dispatch to write it up as though I had committed some crime for the mere suggestion of giving people some protections for exercising their medical freedom, the right to choose what vaccine. In fact, the bill was only tailored very narrowly to the COVID-19 vaccine, because as we all know, even if I guess you wouldn't even consider it a vaccine, it's a shot, a medical device, whatever. So I just say that, I'm not trying to sound like a martyr, but I was quite amazed at how absolute unwillingness to engage in a rational conversation. And so, I could ramble on if you have any particular questions ground that you haven't covered, or things that insights that I could share from the legislature in particular. Fire away. Wish we could accomplish a little bit more this session, but like I say, there just doesn't seem to be an open mind among the Democrats. And so when being in the midst of this COVID pandemic, where we're kind of on the precipice of having a mandated vaccine, it has really forced a couple issues to the surface, at least. And glad we have folks like yourselves that are organizing the community of people who are interested in these issues and willing to engage. We're certainly going to have to do some things to change the lay of the land and get some protections in place for these very fundamental freedoms that we're discussing here.
David, can you hear me?
So again,
Jeff,
fire
you're
away.
really faded.
Yeah,
I'll go ahead. This is
Go
Charlie
ahead.
Froman. And Delegate LaRock, you've been heroic. Also, you've been very well spoken on this issue, which I think is an important comment, because this is not an easy issue to communicate, as you've noticed probably with some of your colleagues on their bills. And I'm sure you've noticed the arrows you get when you go public for health freedom, especially in a marginal district like yours. Tell us about your journey. You're well-spoken, you're consistent on this. Have you gotten a lot of support for standing for health freedom, or have you gotten just arrows and grief? Where do you go from here? Someone like you.
Well, so my journey, I think, is it's a fairly recent journey. Again, like many people, I think this seeing some things that didn't quite look right early on. This is February, March timeframe of this year, and no, excuse me, of last year. It's been about a year. Time flies, doesn't it? Just kind of not having a good feeling about the information that was coming forward and regarding this COVID virus, and just reading a lot of different material. I know my wife read a small book while we were on vacation at the beach last week, and it really, I wish I could remember the name of it, but we would share thoughts and discuss it as she was reading it, and it just brought forward a lot of information about the historical, well, deception, I think is the right word, that has taken place in recent history here in America. I've interacted with a constituent, local friend, Marcia Lassard, who's actually on the ground in the legislature, where we were meeting in session last year, trying to drum up some support, particularly among Democrats. Patrick Hope had a bill in that basically successfully aligned our vaccine schedule in Virginia with the federally established schedule, and that was a disappointment that moved forward. But Marcia has been very helpful in directing me toward good information and helping me become better acquainted with the issues overall, meeting some of the people that are probably on this call. And being a freedom-minded individual in the first place, it's really a natural fit. We homeschooled our kids. I run as a limited government conservative. It's also helped me. I have a daughter who's an RN, and she's a critical thinker herself, and so I test the ideas that I encounter on her, and we bounce different publications back and forth, and it just doesn't. It's a natural fit for me to question these things. I think one of the real pivotal moments for me in my awakening, I'll call it, was to challenge the Virginia Health Commissioner on his HCQ ban, hydroxychloroquine, thinking that how amazed that that they would be banning something that I think back in March is when I read my first article. Doctor in Los Angeles treated 19 patients with some symptoms of the COVID virus, and within a couple of days, symptoms were gone. I thought, well, geez, the virus is over. And lo and behold, you all probably are familiar that a concerted effort came forward to actually ban hydroxychloroquine in Virginia. I brought forward a resolution in the House of Delegates, and with the help of former Delegate Bob Marshall and some other people, and it was very tight, very thorough. Actually got a call from Dr. Harvey Rich, the outspoken professor from Yale, who I think he got quite a bit of attention when his comment that we could save up to 100,000 people or somewhere in that along that order in the United States if that was distributed and used widely as a prophylactic treatment. And then to see the concerted effort to ban this treatment, which used in connection with some other things like zinc and a few others, could probably have saved many, many lives. And to see the false studies, the phony studies that showed up on the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet, and so on, I just realized that this is we're fighting.
You're cutting out, Delegate LaRock.
Okay.
Jeff and Bonnie, are you hearing Delegate LaRock?
Yes, I'm hearing Delegate LaRock.
Okay. Any better now?
Dr. Singleton, if you're
Yeah,
still with us, would
that's
you
excellent.
give a quick... Delegate LaRock, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, there you go. I think Dr. Singleton might add to your frontline early treatment comments, since she's been so active with that with her frontline doctor friends. And maybe someone else ask a question of the delegate. Marilyn?
Yes, well, thank you for everything you've done. I'm out here in California, and we have a few brave souls like you in the legislature, and I know they take so much heat, and it's tough to always let it roll off your back. So here, and thank you. We initially had a lot of trouble trying to say, let's treat early. And continually, people say, well, the CDC lets people stay at home until you turn blue. WebMD says, stay home until you turn blue. I've never heard of such a thing. I worked in critical care medicine. You don't wait until people turn blue. But this hatred for hydroxychloroquine has become embedded in people's minds. Fortunately, we now have ivermectin, which is the same type thing, an anti-parasitic. It's what's used for scabies. It's what's in the dog pills to keep them from getting parasites and fleas and ticks and whatnot. And that's getting more positive. And in fact, some countries are giving ivermectin packets, the ones that don't give hydroxychloroquine packets, and their numbers are astounding. Practically a complete flat line of no new COVID cases. And I don't know whether it's fear of doing the same thing that foreign countries are doing, or I hate to say this, bowing to big pharma, because both of these medications are cheap. Hydroxy's dirt cheap. Ivermectin costs probably 3 times as much as hydroxy, but it's still not very expensive. And it's appalling. So I just hope you keep it up on the other side of the country. We're working hard out here in California to get rid of the stigma of early treatment. And we're chipping away bit by bit. And now that President Trump is no longer president, 2 positive hydroxy studies magically have been published. So maybe we're getting somewhere and can get some lives saved and get us back to real normal, not that crazy new normal. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Bonnie, do you want to ask Delegate LaRock how we get the grassroots conservatives more focused on health tyranny, as if they don't have enough reason from just what's going on naturally to care more about these issues?
Sure. I'm sure that you've seen that some of the people that voted against your bill were not all one party. So I'm not quite sure, the reasons why, but we can pretty much speculate that we're hoping that we'll have people from every walk of life and from every party join us in being concerned about people being forcibly injected, forcibly tested, and just coercions, like we discussed earlier in this meeting, coercions have the effect of a mandate, whether they're through private entities or what have you. So I thought your bill was incredible. But yeah, I would love to hear your view on how you think that we can get more people involved. You said that you don't think that it's really easy to have a discussion with Democratic legislators. I don't think they really wanted to consider the bill. I think they were not open-minded at all in that committee. But what do you think of people in general? What are your thoughts on how the average person might be interested and might get involved?
Yeah, well, thanks for reminding me that it was a bipartisan kill, and I don't disclose what takes place when I'm having quiet conversations among my caucus members, but it is just, I believe, just ignorance. Now, I don't mean to sound narcissistic that and assuming that I'm right, but I came across a good quote the other day, and I'll probably wear it out here for a week or two, but it's Rand Paul said, or no, excuse me, it was Ron Paul said that it can be dangerous to be right when the government's wrong. There's just an intolerance here that has kind of made me a lightning rod. I was outspoken about election integrity, and that has been deemed off limits by many liberals and the media to a large degree. Many aspects of this whole COVID-related conversation, questioning the validity of the what they call the vaccine, and the use of different treatments that are other than the vaccine. It's just hard to comprehend that these seemingly intelligent people, many of them are just who I don't believe to be motivated by money. That's not like they're the ones receiving grants from big pharma or whoever. But it's just a general inclination or instance where a free exchange of ideas is not welcome. Now, I hate to be too general in my criticisms of those who differ with me, but when you are just condemned for having a viewpoint, it's hard to know where to start the conversation. It really is. Doesn't make it impossible. How do we get back to your question? So I'm kind of commenting on the general climate, and I'm sure you've all observed this in some form or another, having been in the advocacy field for medical freedom for a while. But it is a bit of a it really has gotten my attention here. I think what I've found is that while there's a real rejection of the whole notion that the vaccine isn't going to be the holy grail to bring us back to normal, there's also a lot of people, I think a significant percentage of the people who react to the things that I talk about, and I'm talking about my family members, but people in my local community, there is far from a unanimous acceptance of the COVID vaccination. But at the same time, those who do favor it don't seem to want to have a conversation. So I wish I had some really creative suggestions for you, but I would just say keep up the good work, continue to put good information forward. Webinars, meetings eventually. I have a favorite video that I'd have to look up on my phone here. I bet you have all seen it. But I intended to send it to many family members. It's a doctor in about an hour-long interview talking through a lot of the medical considerations, and it's just very, very compelling testimony. I would say, certainly on the level that you'd expect to hear in a congressional hearing on subjects like this. So, I know we all hope that we're not proven wrong and that people don't experience significant, there's a rash of side effects or deaths. One might argue that that's already underway, but I know we don't want to be proven right there. But if that does happen, over the next weeks and months ahead, then obviously as we bring forward sensible, logical arguments, there's going to be, people are going to be more receptive to that. One would think, anyway.
I would hope so. Yeah, I was basically presenting that question because Charles asked me to ask that. I actually had a couple different questions for you, but sure. I think it's significant that Delegate Sam Razul abstained from voting on your bill. So, I mean, that's better than voting against it. So I think there's at least some headway there.
Yep.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think while you're saying that you don't have anything to offer, I think you actually do, because you've been leading by example. I know behind the scenes there is a level of censorship and a level of unwillingness, if you would, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to discuss the matter or to raise the subject amongst party leadership, amongst certain, so we're not just facing censorship from one side. Sometimes I myself have had that in certain Republican areas where they might say, oh, we don't discuss that, we don't want to even go there. So I think you've been leading by example, by not allowing anyone to silence you, and by, more importantly, by continuing to stand up for Virginians. So we're really very grateful for that.
You're very welcome. And
We have a question
ahead.
Delegate, from Christy. We're almost out of time here. Christy, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thanks so much. Delegate LaRock, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I watched the video that you had a link to in an email the other day when you presented, I don't know if it was all the bills or one of them, but the final thing that that seemed to be discussed was that, oh, you know, this is not realistic, that people will be discriminated against because, you know, we don't have enough vaccine for the people that do want it. I'm just wondering, it's hard to, do you have any opinions on, I don't know how true that is, or I guess maybe like how your colleagues have that impression. Just any thoughts if you have any. Thank you.
Yeah, I think you may be alluding to Chairman Sickles' comments that the bill didn't make any sense because there wasn't enough vaccine, so we would never get to the point where people would be forced to have a vaccine. And you know, I hope he's right, but not exactly an argument against the substance of what I'm proposing.
Mm-hmm.
Delegate Price was the one that amazed me the most. I mean, I was very careful to use comments that were thoroughly vetted, you know, quoting the emergency use authorization and the circumstances that align with that, you know, the FDA's authorization not being quite the same as approval and so on. And oh, she just jumped in and said, you know, these are lies and untruths and they're dangerous and harmful. But you know, that wasn't a typical committee hearing, thank goodness. Unfortunately, it's typical, I think, of committee hearings where the chairman and maybe the majority of the members just don't like the idea that's being presented. So they basically get their digs in and then try to shut it down. But yeah, I think when your best defense is, well, don't worry, we'll never get to that point, especially coming from Mark Sickles, Delegate Sickles, who spends a lot of time trying to establish non-discrimination for a whole variety of things. He didn't even want to hear the proposition that some consideration might be in order for the COVID-19 vaccine.
Kind of under a bow.
Bonnie, you want to close us up?
Yeah, I totally agree with Dave LaRock. I think it was just a way of shutting down conversation without addressing the content of the bill itself. But yeah, I think we need to remember that, you know, the fight continues. Everyone has to come to their own conclusion and reach their own decision, do their own research as to whether they will submit if this becomes, you know, mandatory or coerced, or whether they will resist. So I think most of us in this meeting definitely would choose to resist over submitting. But another thing the state fails to realize is that if they try to start, you know, criminally prosecuting people or persecuting people over their religious beliefs, I don't think that making a martyr or martyrs would be in their best interest. So I think we, like Delegate LaRock said earlier, we need to, you know, organize and plan and prepare and continue to fight. And we are very grateful that we have people like Delegate Dave LaRock and others who are there fighting and leading us. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Can I just add a word of encouragement?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, I have a daughter who's in her early 20s, and she's not what I would consider very political. She's sort of libertarian leaning. But on this issue, boy, does she light up. She's very health conscious, as many young people are. And just the mere suggestion that the government could tell her to put this shot in her body, boy, it really, really lights her up. And it encourages me to see that, because it tells me that perhaps young people aren't going to be the pushovers that some allow themselves to be when it comes to medical decisions, that they're going to look at it really closely. So I think that's cause for optimism. It is. I know it is for me.
Indeed.
Well, that was fantastic, I have to say. And guess what? Is it not the same thing every week, Charles? It comes down to you and me and each of us to make it happen. Because somehow, as you can see, there's no legislation or anything that's going to save us in the end. We need to lead them, for them to lead us, so to speak. So I appreciate everybody being here today. It was really great.
Yeah, and it was Dr. Lee Merritt was that video. If you haven't heard that,
Oh well,
it's
I'm
on
gonna.
Rumble. Dr.
Oh
Lee
well,
Merritt.
I'm gonna take advantage of you doing that and giving us a little plug.
What a
Okay.
setup.
Yeah, what a great setup that is. Here, take a look at this. You'll appreciate what we've got to go.
There
It
you
should
go.
be okay, because we'll come back here and do the thing. But here at the bottom, here's the list of all of our channels that we post these on. And so here's Rumble as an example you're referring to. Well, here's the top one right
Yeah.
here is with her.
Yeah,
And then
extraordinary video. Yep.
yeah, we have her on Brighteon. This is a really good
With
collection.
slides.
Yeah.
This is a good one because boy, there's a ton of really powerful stuff, and this one demonstrates how many we've done here, and it's been a pretty incredible show, I have to say. We've learned a lot, and we've moved the needle a little bit. I'm certainly hoping. So thanks for being here today. I do appreciate it.
My pleasure.